Introduction to the Peacekeeper Undead Wizard at Hogwarts. Henry Anthony, an ordinary supermarket cashier. Until one day, a person dressed strangely came to his doorstep and questioned why he had not replied to the letter prohibiting the abuse of magic in the office. Anthony. What did I abuse? Magic. It's impossible, I'm just a regular supermarket clerk. Anthony. Wait, you're not talking about my pet, are you? Or are you talking about me crawling out of the coffin? Dumbledore. Perhaps, Mr. Anthony, would you be willing to work at Hogwarts? So Hogwarts welcomed their new professor of Muggle Studies. And for the sake of his peaceful life, Anthony faced a new challenge. How to prevent an unknown person's resurrection plan. Chapter 1. A beautiful day ends with Azkaban. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, wishing you a wonderful day. Henry Anthony smiled as he bid farewell to the customer and turned to pick up the ice cream from the conveyor belt. Hello. Ah, Kevin, how have you been lately? £2, thank you. It's pretty good, Mr. Anthony. It's just too hot. Kevin handed him the money. And how have you been lately? Anthony found 0 for him and replied, it's pretty good, except for occasionally flipping feathers out of his pocket, everything is normal. That's good, Kevin said sympathetically. I heard Dad say that an owl went crazy and rushed into your window. I don't think it's good to see that all the wild mice in your room have run away. Don't mention it, the owl might think my place is a restaurant, Anthony joked. Alright, Kevin, grab your ice cream and enjoy your summer vacation. He watched Kevin jump out of the supermarket happily, and the smile on his face faded. Henry Anthony is a resident of London's Holly Street and also works as a cashier at the corner of the street at the Wheatley supermarket. 3 days ago, a group of owls broke into his residence, causing him to hide his pet and turn to his neighbors for help. After all, if he were to solve the magnificent flock of birds alone, it would inevitably arouse some suspicion. After being exhausted from being tossed and turned, he became just an ordinary unlucky person. His neighbors teased him about this, and the boring daily newspaper also divided a small section to describe this interesting story. Owls attack a solitary man's window, or covet his pet Dutch pig. He had to urgently requisition a portion of the skeleton to disguise a furry overweight Dutch pig lying in its nest to deal with the photographer. The skeleton cat was furious and tore his sofa apart. Maybe we should get some white wine and make amends for it. Anthony was still thinking about white wine when he finished work, to the point where he walked up to the door and found a man dressed strangely standing there. The other party wore a shirt, tie, suit jacket and even a pair of cufflinks in the summer, but underneath was a workplace skirt. Anthony's corner of the eye twitched and said, I'm not interested. This is my front door, so I'm sorry. The man stared at Anthony, as if he was a dangerous lunatic, and his voice was tense. Mr. Henry Anthony, I am Gyro Ollie from the Magical Law Enforcement Department. I am investigating your alleged violation of the confidentiality law and have never replied to a letter prohibiting the misuse of the magical office. I hope you can cooperate with my work. Mr. Ollie pulled out a wooden stick from somewhere and pointed it at Anthony, saying, meanwhile, due to the unregistered black magic aura in your residence, aura will arrive within 3 minutes. What letter? Anthony frowned. Ollie's behavior was too strange. He looked around for fear of attracting any attention, but found that people were just leisurely doing their own things, as if they couldn't see them. Wait, I understand. Do people like us have a management bureau? Did you bring in those owls? Why, what benefits does exposing me have for you? No matter what he said, the other person just stared at him and shook his head. He was trying to figure out the situation, and with a burst of explosions, several guys in black robes appeared at his doorstep. The 2 of them held down Anthony, and the rest broke through the door. The poor skeleton cat was still in a fit of anger, bowing its back towards the intruder and whimpering, and was instantly torn apart by this group of people. The complaining spirit chicken attempted to protect the remains of its companion, but was also dissipated by the blue light emitted from the wooden stick. Anthony became anxious and said, "What are you doing?" Now that things have come to an end, he can no longer care about his neighbors. He broke away from the people next to him and pointed to the room. "Good cat, come here." Like a strong wind blowing by, scattered bones flew up from every corner and landed in Anthony's arms, making a clanging sound. Anthony waved his hand and waved for a spare skeleton to block the rushing red light, looking down at the scratches and cracks on his pet's bones. This cat is usually carefree and pampered by him. It only knows how to roll on the ground and chase toys. If it doesn't go well, it will get angry and tear down the house. But now he was huddled in his arms, so weak that he had no strength to gather and almost dissipated. The scattered spirit chicken woke Anthony up from nightmares every morning and brought him back to a beautiful and peaceful life. And now it's like a new nightmare. The cat's bones trembled in his arms. "Don't be afraid." Anthony hugged them tightly and looked at the group of black-robed people. "Who are you? What is your purpose? Are there any misunderstandings?" He had realized that this group of people feared him and resented him. They acted as if he would randomly pull people to explode together, and they were ready to die with him. "It's really outrageous." "Don't be afraid either," he said. "No matter what you're afraid of, I don't mean to attack you. I'm just a small employee who keeps his guard." A black-robed man sneered, "Maintain the counter-curse. Don't listen to the dark wizard's nonsense. Stay vigilant, don't let him escape." "Sir," Anthony said helplessly, "if I wanted to run, would have run long before you came. Mr. Ollie had informed me in advance that there was a group of people on the way. I just didn't expect you to be so unreasonable." The person spat on the ground and cursed in disgust, saying, "Necromancer, the ministry should have approved the emergency life curse long ago." He suddenly bullied Anthony and pressed the wooden stick against his neck. "I warn you not to play tricks, otherwise I will give you a life curse even with half a disability." "Search." The other person whispered something, and all the objects on Anthony's body flew out. His wallet was carefully rummaged through several times, and the searcher frowned and shook his head, pressing against his wooden stick and exerting even more force. "Where's your wand? Tell me its position, don't move your hands." Anthony knew they were looking for his own stick. He sighed and said, "I'm sure you don't believe it. Why don't we do this? I'll do a trick for you." His gaze fell on the flower bed next to the house. In the midsummer season, the sun sets late, and the marsh grass is not yet closed. It sways gently in the breeze, creating a group of vengeful butterflies that shimmer with golden light under the sunset. The butterfly flew around the black-robed man twice before dissipating in the afterglow. Anthony watched them disperse gently. "How to put it, I don't need a wand," he explained as he hugged his cat, "but I really don't have any aggressiveness. Take me along with any of the procedures you want to follow, let's resolve any misunderstandings." Around 11 o'clock in the evening, the night falls low, and a crescent moon hangs in the distance on the sea surface. Anthony's routine has always been regular, he is already tired. He yawned and looked bored at the black waves beside him. Thick fog shrouded the hull of the ship, and he didn't know how long the voyage would be. The companion. Anthony now knew his profession was oarer. Silently leaned against the side of the ship, holding a wand to control the course. When a light yellow light shone from the front of the wand, the fog suddenly dissipated, and a solitary island appeared out of nowhere in the midst of the turbulent sea. If it weren't for the chaos, Anthony would have been curious and amazed about it. This is his first encounter with this magical world. When he first discovered his bizarre abilities, he was also filled with distant aspirations, fantasizing about others like him, fantasizing about a wonderful picture unfolding before his eyes, and the elf hunter knocking on the door to beg for a sip of wine, like those fairy tales. But he is a real person. After moving, he quickly found a stable place to live and applied for a job. With friendly neighbors and familiar customers, he no longer needs illusions. He piled up his favorite things in the house like a hamster hoarding winter food. He even has his own cat. And now this late world suddenly rushes in. He no longer needs it. He just wants to find someone who can communicate, solve all of this, and then go home and take a good shower, and go to work on time the next day. He didn't wait for the rational person he wanted to meet. He was taken to a place called the Ministry of Magic and went through a few brief QA sessions. Anthony. I don't know what owls are here for, they might have been driven away by my pet before. Yes, this is my pet. Yes, I can summon vengeful spirits. Do I need a demonstration? Signed a document confirming the authenticity of the record, and then boarded the ship to this place called Azkaban. The staff in Azkaban. Probably. Lazily walked out of the duty room when they saw Anthony being escorted over and said, "What is it?" Anthony's colleague Auror whispered, "Black Wizard, it seems like there's something wrong with his brain. It's not the same problem as those before." The staff looked at Anthony twice and pointed to his arms, asking, "What kind of question is holding a bone like holding a teddy bear?" Auror was startled. Finding Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Anthony has always been very cooperative, to the point where everyone forgets that the other party is still holding their own casting materials. "Put it down," Auror said to Anthony, "you can't bring dark magic items into Azkaban. It's ridiculous, no one of us actually wants to destroy them." Anthony shook his head and said, "There are bones everywhere here, so having more cats and dogs is nothing." The staff also said, "If he likes to hold it, hold it. There are a bunch of dementors guarding over from the Black Wizard. It is said to be an undead wizard," said colleague Auror to the staff member in a low voice, pointing to Anthony. "Isn't it extinct?" the staff exclaimed in surprise, feeling a bit embarrassed after trying it out. Anthony's words just reminded them. Azkaban is the burial ground of countless black wizards, and can be regarded as the arsenal of undead wizards. Unfortunately, undead wizards have been extinct for many years, and the deadly curse they used in the past has been abolished. The Dementor's kiss has become the strongest means, and all the black wizards captured now are sent to Azkaban. I'll make a report for you. Take your bones to the innermost cell first. The staff decided to stabilize the necromancer. You go back and ask the director what to do. You guys, transfer all the dementors that can be drawn now to guard his cell. Good guy, I sent a match into the fireworks shop. Great, thank you, Anthony smiled at the staff. Damn it. The man watched Anthony go deep into Azkaban and roast to Auror. He acted as if I had just handed him a bottle of jam on the table. I almost said it to him. Don't be fooled by appearances, they are undead wizards, the dark wizards among the dark wizards. Auror shook his head and said, the madman among the madmen. The Dementors will treat him well. Chapter 2. Springer's Troubles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, Rufus Scringer rubbed his forehead. So, Mr. Anthony, have you escaped from prison? Not really, sir, Anthony said calmly. What you're talking about is somewhat of an illegal detention. I'm completely clueless about law, but I clearly haven't gone through the proper judicial procedures. I worked hard and came home from work, and for no apparent reason, I was brought here. Then a group of people who constantly threatened to kill me asked me why my finger-sucking chicken could move. I've been very cooperative with your work. If it's really work. But it's a bit difficult to keep me and more than 50 unknown things locked up indefinitely. I just went on leave with my boss because I couldn't explain what I was going to do. She is very unhappy, and I am also very unhappy. As a taxpayer, I request the relevant department to give me an explanation. Obviously, you are the relevant department, so I am here. Do you want some more tea, Mr. Anthony? Scringer knocked on the edge of the table, and the teapot flew up for the third time to fill Anthony's cup. Okay, let me repeat, soul summoning is a very, very, very dark black magic. I'm willing to believe you may not have intended it, but unfortunately, users of such black magic can be locked up in Azkaban without trial. I'll say it again, Mr. Scringer. I'm not satisfied, and I'm requesting an appeal. If the appeal is not approved, I'll step out of your schedule time and time again, go to the supermarket to work during the day, and come here at night to hinder you from leaving work. Anthony said seriously, I just want a peaceful life. If this peaceful life violates any of your regulations, then explain it to me clearly. Scringer sighed angrily and said, Mr. Anthony, in short, playing with bones and souls is not allowed because it is suspected of undead magic. Undead magic is a complete black magic. It tries to blur the boundaries of life and death, and history has taught us not to do so. Hogwarts history class. Forget it, you might have been studying the composition of Professor Binns at that time. Anthony took a sip of tea and calmly pointed out, this is obviously unreasonable because you just tried to punish me by imprisoning me with a group of ragged robes that blur the boundaries of life and death. By the way, I'm not a student of your magic school, so unfortunately, I haven't attended your history class. Scringer shook his head and said, Mr. Anthony, I'm sorry, there seems to have been some misunderstanding. What is your alma mater? King's College London, Anthony replied, I have a complete personnel file. Since you are so knowledgeable, you can go check it yourself. He couldn't help but prick. The ignorance and arrogance of this group of people left him extremely disappointed in the wizarding world. At this moment, for the first time, he reminisced about his former colleagues in the HR department. Compared to waving a wand, the level of proficiency in communication, and playing soccer, among those colleagues is more like a superpower. Have you ever studied or worked outside of England? Dem strong. Scringer spread out the parchment. No, just look it up, Anthony said confidently. Except for March last year, I have been living in a place you call the Muggle world. I have an employment contract, a rental contract, a registered address, medical insurance records, bank billing records, and you can even directly ask my street neighborhood committee. Untested British wizard. This is Dumbledore's business. Scringer nodded as he listened to Anthony's complaint and wrote a letter, Mr. Anthony, I believe this is an unexpected tragedy. Hogwarts did not detect and remind you to accept magical education in a timely manner, so you do not understand the dark nature and taboo reasons of undead magic. Just assume you do not understand. In any case, I will immediately inform the minister and Hogwarts principal of your situation and let them make a decision. Anthony watched with great interest as Scringer tied the letter and copy to the feet of two owls. As things seemed to finally turn around, Anthony's mood also improved. If the wizard's email CC is so complex, their owl probably won't like mass sending too much. He even took some time off, trying to understand how owls read delivery addresses. Perhaps it was because he was too focused that an owl turned its head and raised its wings, making a threatening cry. By the way, where were you in March last year? Seeing off the owl, Scringer recalled Anthony's account. Anthony withdrew his gaze, feeling a bit embarrassed. I should have died then. Scringer stared at Anthony, as if trying to understand what the dark words of the undead wizard were. So, regarding that blurry boundary between life and death. Anyway, I probably died for over a month, Anthony said. I died for over a month, repeated Scringer. Yes, and then resurrected through my unremitting efforts. Resurrection. Then I realized that I could play with bones. I moved home once, for reasons you can imagine, and tried to rebuild my peaceful life. A year later, a large group of owls rushed into my house, followed by a group of people knocking on my door and killing my pet. I went to the bookstore www.zhaozuiyuan.com and indiscriminately announced that I would spend the rest of my life with more than 50 ragged robes. Anthony summarized his statement. I'm sorry, said Scringer reflexively. Thank you. Scringer glared at him and said, Do you know Dumbledore? I believe you're referring to the principal of Hogwarts, Anthony said. Scringer corrected, it's Hogwarts. Forget it. He needs to come over. He pulled out his wand and said, call out the Guardian. If Dumbledore doesn't believe it again, tell him there's a resurrected undead wizard here, and I think he'll be interested. He hesitated for a few seconds, and then tell the minister that Dumbledore might come over to investigate the undead wizard who caused Hogwarts to fail. Anthony watched as the silver animal lowered its head and rubbed against Scringer's hand, leaping over his desk and disappearing from the bookshelf. It's really beautiful, and quite intelligent, he exclaimed. Yes, Mr. Undead Wizard, I'm glad you appreciate it. The Guardian Curse, the opposite of dark magic, the nemesis of Dementors, said Scringer politely. Anthony was even curious about some knowledge he didn't know at this moment. Dementors. Scringer waved his hand and said, these are the dark creatures that blur the boundaries of life and death. They survive by sucking on human pleasure, and it's hard to say if they have intelligence. He suddenly realized something. Wait a minute, can you control them? Of course not, Anthony said. Why? Scringer breathed a sigh of relief and then realized something was wrong. So how did you come out? I politely request them, Anthony said, please and thank you, it's very useful. Dumbledore. Come over immediately. Chapter 3. Professorship positions descending from the sky. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, I thought resurrection was a very common thing, Anthony said, glancing discreetly at Dumbledore's silver beard. I mean, it's quite common for you. To be honest, the other party seems to have gone through several centuries. If this kind old man told him that he had been resurrected 5 times, he would also believe it. Actually not, Mr. Anthony. You startled Rufus and me a lot, Dumbledore smiled. But I think you misunderstood. You're not experiencing resurrection. I thought you were trying to convince me that the current case is a resurrection case, said Scringer with a stern expression. No, Rufus, I'm not old enough to lose respect for the rules of magic, Dumbledore said. If you ask me, I would say Mr. Anthony experienced his first magical uprising when he was 26 years old. He was transported by time magic for a month and was surprised to find that everyone thought he had passed away. This is rare, but by no means impossible. All your inferences are based on the one-cited words of this undead wizard, said Scringer. Compared to his expression, his tone is much smoother. Dumbledore's blue eyes gently looked at the other person and said, I may not be a potion master, but you should believe that an old man may be able to distinguish between true emetics. I must say, you treat our guests a bit aggressively. The undead wizard and Azkaban fugitive, murmured Auror's office director, he's glad crazy-eyed isn't here. Anthony frowned and said, but I really. Dumbledore interrupted him, I believe you're not trying to lie, child. But the truth doesn't necessarily mean it's true, does it? He gave Anthony a sharp glance from behind his crescent-shaped glasses, so Anthony didn't try to argue anymore. At that moment, the other person looked too much like his high school teacher. If his teacher suddenly decided to change gender, grow beard, change his eyes to blue, somehow break his nose bridge, and fall in love with a deep blue robe and hat. And he had always had some respect for his high school teacher. Scringer regarded his silence as a default. A natural undead wizard who has experienced time magic, Dumbledore, you are giving me a difficult problem. What should I do? Send him to the Department of Mysterious Affairs. His yellow eyes were fixed on Dumbledore, like a lion waiting to be hunted. Of course not, Rufus, Dumbledore smiled. Although no one can deny Mr. Anthony's talent, he has not received formal magical education. Yes, this is of course my dereliction of duty, so I sincerely suggest that you allow me to make up for it, is that okay? Scringer and Dumbledore looked at each other. Dumbledore, do you want to guarantee a black wizard again, he asked. If you want to understand it that way, then yes. Dumbledore became serious, I don't want to argue with you anymore. He will come back, which is an undeniable fact for me. Think about it, a undead wizard who can freely enter and exit Azkaban, and the arrival of millions of undead legions, will he not be tempted? Even if, we can nip this possibility in advance. Scringer whispered fiercely, a Dementor's kiss. Dumbledore gave him a meaningful glance and said, think about history. You've read more detailed history than textbooks, think about it. Scringer sat back at the table. He suddenly looked quite tired. Hogwarts is a school for underage wizards and wizards, he said finally. 27 years old is not a minor at all. Dumbledore pondered, well. Perhaps, Mr. Anthony, would you be willing to work at Hogwarts? Anthony carefully considered it. I don't have a better choice, do I? I'm afraid not, said Dumbledore apologetically. The cashier sounds really great, but I guarantee that the teaching position at Hogwarts is also very stable. Usually. In that case, Henry. Please allow me to call you that. I would like to welcome you on behalf of Hogwarts. Oh, no way. An artificial voice sounded in the fireplace. Anthony was startled. A woman's head was suspended in the fire, with a toad-like big mouth and a fake smile. Umbridge, it's so nice to see you, said Scringer in a tone that sounded completely untrustworthy. What do our respected Minister Fudge have to say? Cough cough, I'm sorry to interrupt you. But I do want to remind you that if the undead wizards teach cute children, the public won't be particularly happy. Umbridge said, do you know who they will complain to, right? She said coquettishly, moreover, even if you decide not to pursue the matter of undead magic. Oh, the Aurors will understand, right? You just need to tell them that this is what Dumbledore means. Scringer looked at her angrily, seemingly trying not to extinguish the fire with a basin of water. According to Article 73 of the International Confidentiality Law, we must at least destroy his wand. Since he claims to have no wand, it is customary to deprive him of his casting ability. When she spoke, she didn't even glance at Anthony, as if discussing how to dispose of a statue. No, it can't be left on the roadside. Let the garbage collector handle it instead. Anthony interjected, depriving casting ability. Somehow, even with a head in the fireplace, Umbridge was able to maintain a high and intimate posture. She smiled and said, life without hands may not be easy at first, but you will adapt, dear. That's probably not possible, madam. I still need my hands to count the goods. Anthony looked at her directly, and I don't need my hands to cast the spell. Umbridge let out a scream and disappeared. Scringer jumped up from his seat and said, what did you do? A beam of red light shot straight at Anthony from his wand, but was blocked by blue light halfway through. Dumbledore. Don't be nervous, Rufus. What is the prototype of the Muggle Destroyer curse? Dumbledore withdrew his wand, relaxed as if guiding students to think in class. A magic commonly used by dark creatures. The art of intimidation. Scringer reacted, it's amazing, Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts, a dark creature. Dumbledore shook his head and said, Quirinus will come back to teach defense against the dark arts. If you remember, he was previously a professor of Muggle Studies, Note 1. And considering Henry's experience, I think he is perfectly qualified to teach Muggle Studies. But Professor Bobaki. Carrie did a great job, didn't she? She's a passionate and good partner, but compared to academics, she seems to be more interested in doing something practical lately. Maybe she will become your colleague in the future, Dumbledore smiled. We might see her on the Muggle Mediation Committee. She'll be happy to have someone share some of the teaching tasks. Scringer seems almost convinced. At this moment, the office door was knocked on. A chubby face leaned in and smiled kindly, oh, Albus, what a surprise. I heard you've encountered a little problem. Minister. Scringer stood up and nodded at him. Principal Dumbledore wants to hire Mr. Anthony as a professor at Hogwarts. Ah, Albus, you always amaze me. Find Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, Fuji nodded. Of course, there's no problem at all. As long as Mr. Anthony receives the appropriate punishment for his illegal behavior, he will become an innocent magical citizen again, no matter what profession he wants to pursue. Anthony cleared his throat. He doesn't understand why these big shots in the Ministry of Magic are so good at seeing him as a sculpture. I am an innocent citizen, he insisted, biting yes particularly clearly. Dumbledore smiled at him, almost making him feel like he was causing trouble. Dumbledore turned to Fudge and asked simply, so, what does he have to give? The undead wizard has repeatedly violated confidentiality laws and resisted the Ministry of Magic's mission. Fudge pondered, alas, why hasn't Hogwarts registered this wizard? Things have become much more complicated now. Let's take it lightly, okay? Deprive the ability to cast spells. Dumbledore apologized for the school's negligence and rejected Fudge's proposal. Principal Hogwarts proposed that he sponsor future professors. The Minister of Magic rejected the principal's guarantee. The holder of the first-class medal of the Merlin Order guaranteed the principal's guarantee. The members of Wizengamot rejected the guarantee for the first-class medal. The chief magician of Wizengamot has guaranteed the first-class medal. Fuji was defeated and said angrily, of course, Albus, of course. As long as you're willing. Scringer remained silent throughout the entire process. Anthony was amazed. Dumbledore placed his hand on his shoulder and said, all right, Henry, we still have some contracts to sign. Perhaps you're willing to come back to Hogwarts with me. His hand revealed an irresistible attitude, if we're lucky, we'll still be able to catch the afternoon tea prepared by the elves. Chapter 4. Diagon Alley. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, Anthony lay on the bed of the broken cauldron bar, playing with the claws of the skeleton cat one after another. In order to repair his pet, he stayed in the kitchen of the bar for half a day, tinkering with a long table of boneless chicken wings, boneless chicken legs, boneless chicken soup, and boneless fried chicken. 5 chickens sacrificed their lives for this, and Anthony sacrificed money for them. Considering that he is repairing a cat that does not require food, this is a fairly cost-effective transaction. The boss knocked on his door and said, Mr. Anthony, Professor Bubaki is here. The owner of the Broken Cauldron Bar is Tom, a kind bald old man. He and his bar give a completely consistent feeling. Somewhat dark and dilapidated, but strangely warm. And you will never know how much wine he has in his collection. He didn't care where Anthony came from, Dumbledore introduced it, didn't he, sneered at Anthony's Azkaban past, sir, I'm a bar owner. Even if it's not overturning the alley, and even bought Anthony a glass of flame whiskey, secrecy, after hearing that the charge was a violation of confidentiality laws. Thanks to his smooth and seasoned attitude, Anthony quickly settled down at the Broken Cauldron Bar and decided to treat Tom as the landlord with ease. He cannot go home because according to the requirements of the Ministry of Magic, he cannot use any magic in the Muggle community, and his cat is a group of moving magic. He told Tom that his employer would probably send someone to deliver the contract in a few days, and asked Tom to pay more attention for him. However, when Tom learned that Professor Bubaki would be coming, he was surprised and immediately promised to call him. Coming. Anthony responded loudly, pushing the cat down from his chest. The skeleton cat jumped onto the pillow in dissatisfaction and shook its body. Anthony rushed into the bathroom, quickly washed his face, and tidied up his clothes in front of the mirror. I would suggest you change to a more appropriate outfit, young man. The mirror said sharply, what are you wearing? A tablecloth. Thank you for your suggestion, it's of no help, Anthony muttered, holding the skeleton cat in and confronting the mirror. The cat sat unhappy in the sink, its tail slapping the tiles. I won't fix it if you break your tail yourself, Anthony warned. Good cat, be quiet. If everything goes smoothly, I'll have the salary to buy white wine again. The cat lay down and stopped paying attention to him. When he opened the door, he happened to see Professor Bubaki and Tom jokingly walking upstairs. Professor Bubaki is a petite middle-aged witch responsible for the Muggle research course throughout the school. She has a pale face and a shallow dimple when laughing. As soon as she saw Anthony, she nodded and said, "Ah, I think you are my future successor. You do look very Muggle." "That's because I was less than a week ago," Anthony thought. Thanks to Azkaban, it doesn't even have a uniform, to the point where Anthony is still wearing a plaid shirt and pants, and can walk into a convenience store at any time to reapply for a cashier position. Yes, he has resigned from Whaley Supermarket. When Dumbledore introduced him to Professor McGonagall, the serious vice principal frowned and looked at him several times, then whispered to Dumbledore for a while before pointing out a very obvious problem. A person cannot have two full-time jobs at the same time. After enjoying afternoon tea, he and Dumbledore were sent by Professor McGonagall to resign from their jobs as cashiers. "You decided to hire, Principal," Professor McGonagall said. "A good start and a good end." The HR department was furious about his unforeseeable resignation, but Dumbledore somehow convinced him. When they left, everyone seemed to believe that leaving an employee did not require any application. They also felt that Anthony's salary was paid on a daily basis and forcibly gave him a few pounds. Now, Anthony has terminated all employment relationships and become a proud unemployed wanderer. Dumbledore advanced the room fee for the Broken Cauldron Bar for him. The hotel on Charing Cross had solemnly told him not to accept pounds, and asked him to consider repaying the money after he joined. Professor Bubaki is here today to deliver the contract. She also wanted to see her colleagues, by the way, especially after hearing that they had been living in the Muggle world and needed to accompany her into Diagon Alley. She became even more curious about this possible successor. This is a public contract, and all professors are the same. The signature column is at the end. She naturally closed the door, took out the contract and quill from her handbag, and took out another letter. "And this is a private document." Anthony followed her instructions and wrote, "I, Henry Anthony, confirm receipt of a well-sealed Hogwarts encrypted letter," next to the mailing address. The envelope slowly opened and spit out 2 long sheets of parchment. The parchment clearly states his teaching allowance, research funding, and the distribution time and application method of various subsidies. After Anthony signed and confirmed, he kept 1 copy himself and sent the other copy to the envelope. The envelope eagerly swallowed up the document, gave it a memorable smack, and quietly lay back on the table. The first clause of the contract is very short. Both parties promise not to harm each other during their term of office. "So broad," he said, "there are too many loopholes." Professor Bubaki shook his head seriously and said, "Don't underestimate the promise of magical witnessing, it flows in our lives." "This does sound very serious." Anthony got serious and carefully read the other parts of the contract. Most of them are quite formatted, nothing more than the rights and obligations of Professor Hogwarts. He signed at the designated location, wiped the tip of his feather pen, and prepared to return Professor Bubaki. The parchment of the contract suddenly flew up from the table, suspended in mid-air, and was burned into powder by a cluster of golden flames. With a clang, a brass key fell out of the ashes. In Professor Bubaki's encouraging gaze, Anthony picked it up in confusion. His signature was engraved on the front of the key, and a coat of arms was burned on the back. The H character in the center floated faintly, surrounded by 4 animals. "Welcome to Hogwarts, Professor Anthony." Professor Bubaki said, "You have an office and a private room in the castle." "All right, that's what's going on. Let's go now and take a look at Diagon Alley." "Count 3 blocks up and 2 blocks horizontally," Professor Bubaki demonstrated. With just a gentle tap of the wand, the most central street in the wizarding world of Britain will open to you. Anthony pondered, "First of all, I need a wand." "You do need it, the principal told me, Professor Bubaki said happily. But before that, you'd better go to Gringotts to exchange some wizard currency. Then we'll go buy clothes. You can't walk into the Ollivander wand store in this way, no, everyone will be watching you. After buying clothes, we'll go buy wands. Oh. And textbooks. Of course, we'll also go to the bookstore. Anthony found that she had an amazing ability to plan their itinerary with an incredibly warm but unquestionable ease. He was secretly curious about how Dumbledore spoke to Professor Bubaki. Your new colleague doesn't have a wand. When you give him the contract, take him to buy one. Oh, don't worry, he is indeed a wizard, Azkaban can prove it. Ah yes, he's a dark wizard, but he loves muggles. Okay, he said obediently. Professor Bubaki looks quite satisfied. They went to the Ghouling Pavilion. When those fairies heard that Anthony didn't have an account, they seemed to be greatly offended and constantly emphasized the importance of savings to him. Anthony had to exchange more currency and deposited a minimum deposit of Shika in the Gringotts to open a vault. You will find it necessary to have a private vault, said the fairy who handled his business as they left. Anthony swore that he heard the fairy curse softly as he walked out of Gringotts, complaining that the poor ghost wouldn't save more. Professor Bubaki said calmly, "You'll get used to it, Professor Anthony. On the plus side, they'll use every drop of blood to guard your side of the West." They met several wizards with peculiar behavior at Madame Morkan's clothing store. They seemed to have the same poor eyesight as the officials of the Ministry of Magic, who mistake people for statues. However, this time Professor Bubaki has also become a statue. Pure-blooded. Professor Bubaki snorted and proudly pulled Anthony to stand in line behind them. Stand straight and show them Muggle costumes. Anthony watched as the person in front turned sideways, gave them a disgusted look, and turned around to leave the team. Professor Bubaki eagerly occupied the other party's position. Zhaoshuyuan.com, who is that? Anthony asked in a low voice. I don't know, Professor Bubaki said nonchalantly, some pure-blooded person who claims to be aristocratic and hates muggles. Nobles. Anthony said, just to confirm, is there a special queen in the wizarding world? Your Majesty the Witch. Professor Bubaki burst out with a burst of joyful laughter. No, of course not, she said, they're not any aristocrats either. When it comes to it, Nick, who almost lost his head, has a more substantial title. Anthony concluded, a proud ordinary wizard. Professor Bubaki nodded with a smile and said, not bad at all. I am increasingly convinced of the principal's choice, and you will be a very good Muggle research professor. The team was moving slowly forward. When it was their turn, Anthony was already a bit tired. According to his request, the most basic is good, Mrs. Morkan recommended a set of standard black wizard robes and matching shoes. Anthony glanced briefly at this classic collection that had won the best-selling title for 16 years, then nodded randomly and settled on it. He can't distinguish so much, in short, half of the clothing store is black-robed. Various black robes, including those with pockets, dark patterns, cufflinks, knee-length, ankle-length, and floor-length. Anthony looked down at his blue plaid shirt and then at the robes around him. To be honest, who is more like a black wizard? He restrained himself from taking the tape measure that automatically measured the size. Always thinking it was a long fly. And then took the clothes handed over by Mrs. Morkan and changed them in the fitting room. Did you change it? It fits so well. Madame Morkan's craftsmanship has always been the best. Professor Bubaki said, now, young man, let's go get you a wand. Chapter 5. The Non-Existent Unicorn and the Disappearing Undead Magic. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Unlike Anthony's expectations, the process of selecting a wand was lackluster. Ollivander and Professor Bubaki talked about her wand, then stared at Anthony with silver eyes for a while, silently measuring his size, and let him start the seemingly endless trial and error process. Anthony stood in the shop, waving his wand one by one according to the instructions of the wand maker. Sometimes the tip of the wand emits a crackling spark, like an electric light about to short-circuit. Ollivander would snatch the wand before he could hold the spark, painting 8 and give him another one. No, maybe it's this one. Sometimes, before he could reach out for it, the wand in the box trembled. Of course not. How could I not have thought of it? Ollivander immediately closed the lid and called out. Some other wands in his hand are no different from polished wooden sticks. In the words of the wand maker, they seem dead. Just as Anthony was pondering whether he really needed a wand. To be honest, without a wand, he wouldn't blow himself up. Ollivander pulled out the next wand from the shelf and stuffed it into his hand, saying, "Try this one. Silver basswood, unicorn tail hair. 10 3/4 inches, average elasticity." Anthony grabbed it. He held his breath. "That's it," he whispered. Ollivander looked at him with wide, pale eyes and said, "Wave it, Mr. Anthony, do whatever you want." Anthony gently shook his wand. The mottled light and shadow walked upstream of the store wall, forming a winged Pegasus with a terrifying horn on its head. "Wow," Professor Bubaki said. "Wow," Anthony sighed. This feeling is very wonderful. He no longer feels like he is holding a wooden stick or firework stick in his hand, he feels complete. As if this was already a part of him, his wand remained firmly in his hand, with every curve perfectly fitting against his palm. Unexperienced magic flowed within him, some magic different from the skeleton cat and the vengeful chicken. It's amazing. Every time a wand chooses its owner, I have to say this sentence, it's amazing. Ollivander said, "Your wand really likes you, Mr. Anthony. Don't let it down. Don't hurt it." Anthony pinched the silver shaft of his staff and said, "I also really like it." "Thank you, Mr. Ollivander." "Great." Ollivander took Garon and escorted them to the door. "By the way, if you don't mind, what do you think when waving your wand? We usually don't see such concrete connections." "I was thinking." Anthony recalled in confusion, "Unicorn. You said it's made of unicorn fur, so I was thinking about unicorns." He smiled apologetically at Ollivander, "I guess it's not very helpful." "No, it's very helpful. Unicorns don't look like that, sir," Ollivander said gently. "Anthony. Professor Bubaki suppressed a smile and said, "Let's go, Professor Anthony. We really need to go buy some books." According to the book list provided by Professor Bubaki, he found the textbooks for the compulsory courses in grades 1 to 5 at Hogwarts. Of course, he also did not forget Muggle researches, the life and social habits of British Muggle families. When he picked up the magic history textbook, he took a deep breath for its thickness and weight. He does need this, but this hardcover textbook costs 2 gold coins. If we add the textbooks we have found so far, we can basically spend all his remaining money, leaving him only 3 cents. That gentleman, it's a second-hand area inside, and most textbooks are there. The clerk at Lycan bookstore shouted through the heavy bookshelves, "If you don't mind, you can walk inside and take a look." Professor Bubaki also asked him, "Do you plan to buy all the new books?" "Of course not," Anthony said, "I just didn't know it was second-hand here." He carefully bypassed the piled-up bookshelf and squeezed through the narrow gap. These bookshelves emitted a smell mixed with wood, ink, bread, and dust, making his nose itch to sneeze. Some books opened their eyes on the spine as he passed by, startling him. The second-hand bookshelf was placed at the very bottom, almost overflowing. If it weren't for the magic binding, this bookshelf would have exploded long ago. Anthony struggled to pull out the corresponding textbooks and picked out a few that had not yet peeled off their covers. Some second-hand textbooks were so tattered that they seemed to be snatched back by a salesperson from the mouth of a dragon. In addition to textbooks, there were many books on the second-hand bookshelf that captivated him, and he had to go back to Gringotts to exchange some currency. After owning his own wand, he couldn't wait to learn more about it. For this reason, he bought many wand-related books, Wand Care Guide, Understanding Your Wand, and Wand Story, and unexpectedly dug up some dusty, mixed historical and unofficial magic history reference materials from the bottom layer of the bookshelf. Professor Bourbaki watched him stack the books on the counter and sighed with tolerance. "Look at you, you're like a little boy who just bought a broom." She shrunk and lightened the books for him, allowing him to easily carry them back to the Broken Cauldron bar. "I guess you're not in the mood to continue browsing. But now that you have your own wand, you can come by yourself anytime," she said with a smile. "That's it for today. I'm looking forward to meeting you at Hogwarts, Professor Anthony. By the way, you're in charge of 3rd and 4th grade this year. You can freely choose your textbooks, just write a letter to Maliva, but I strongly recommend that book, The Life and Social Habits of British Muggle Families." Anthony suddenly realized a problem. It's only 2 months since the start of school, and he needs to prepare lessons. And he doesn't know anything. After bidding farewell to Professor Bourbaki, he hurried back to the Broken Cauldron bar and plunged into the book. His cat tried to cause trouble, but he held it in his arms and explained the principle of clear water like a spring seriously. Soon, he withdrew to sleep under the bed in a state of lack of interest. If it weren't for Tom bringing champagne to him, he might have completely forgotten about time. When he went to open the door, he got up from his chair and suddenly felt black in front of him. His legs were weak, and he realized that he had missed lunch and dinner. "Congratulations," said the owner of the Broken Cauldron bar. "The new professor at Hogwarts is worth celebrating. This is a new product, just as new as your new professor." He laughed at his witty words. Anthony took the cup and drank it all in one gulp. "Thank you. Do you still have a sandwich?" "Champagne and a shiko, thank you for your patronage," Tom said. "We only have beef sandwiches left. 5 silver shirkos, would you like them?" "Here's one." "This unscrupulous merchant who took advantage of the situation," Anthony said rudely, counting out 6 silver coins. After eating the sandwich, he opened the standard spell again. Thanks to his past student career, Anthony is very good at literature reading. The textbook written for the 11-year-old wizard is easy to understand and has a clear layout. The second-hand book he bought even retains the notes of the student from that year. After only half a day, he dared to say that he could fight back and forth with ordinary first-grade students. Provided that he didn't use undead magic. Out of curiosity about the necromancer, he also read the history of magic materials. Due to their excessive preference for gathering near cemeteries, undead wizards almost disappeared during medieval witch hunting. Thanks to the covert reporting of hostile wizards. And were subsequently annihilated by the international wizarding community, finally declared extinct in the late 19th century, becoming a profession that has been passed down in poetry. The concise history of magic excerpts an ancient poem. In the story, the necromancer summoned an army of undead spirits, forcing people to fight against the corpses of their own relatives and friends. A witch saw her deceased daughter appear in front of her, and when she was forced to destroy the child's body, she left in anger and cursed the necromancer with her daughter's bones and her own flesh and blood. "I curse you with pure bones, I curse you with angry flesh and blood." She shouted, "I want death to torment you in the same way. I want to drink your blood with death. I crave it so much." In the poem, the mother successfully cursed. When her enemy died, blood rushed out like a spring. She sipped, bitter blood. Sweet blood. The book points out that this passage can correspond to the vampire legend in some parts of southern England. At the same time, another poem circulating in northern Finland also has a similar plot, but it turns into avenging one's son. And at the end of the poem, the mother also became a necromancer, transforming the bones of her enemies into her own lowly slave. Zhaozuiyuan.com, we have reason to believe that these similarities are not accidental coincidences, but a glimpse of historical facts. Death and revenge, as primitive manic powers, are present in black magic and constantly emerge in the process of magical civilization. The images of undead wizards in literature are different, but their deaths are astonishingly unified. Ancient black magic follows the chain of hatred, passing from the perpetrators to the avengers, ultimately leading all stories to the Grim Reaper. Anyway, this magic that is most deeply entangled with the Grim Reaper has disappeared into the long river of time. Anthony closed the book. This author seems to have a peculiar view on the history of magic, believing that magic originated from the confrontation between people and the Grim Reaper, and that black magic is the weapon of the Grim Reaper. The author repeatedly emphasizes that when a person is addicted to black magic, death has already followed that person. Interestingly, when the book mentions death, the wording is quite neutral. He looked at the author's name on the cover. Pandora Lovegood. Note 1, write the answer on the riddle, Anthony murmured. In order to drive away the history of the undead wizard from his mind, he decided to practice the spell again before going to bed. He filled the empty sandwich plate with clean water like a spring, then let it float, Jugatum Leviosa, he recited loudly, and then removed the spell to let it fall to the ground. He successfully restored the plate with restoration, but no matter how much he pointed at the floor to clean it up, the pool of water still swayed with warm yellow reflections under the candlelight without restraint. Anthony sighed and stood up to take a towel. The simpler the method, the less likely it is to make mistakes, Anthony murmured. Learn the wisdom of Muggles, wizards. He decided to flip through the textbooks of Muggle Studies tomorrow and see how wizards perceive ordinary people who don't know magic. Chapter 6. Muggle Studies. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. The next morning, Anthony went downstairs to finish breakfast and returned to his room, sorting out the books into different categories. His room now seems to belong to some OW 5th grade students on the eve of the LS exam. Notes are spread out on the table, high must-read books are piled up on the floor, and study schedules are lined up on the wall. He found Professor Babaki's enthusiastic recommendation of The Life and Social Habits of British Muggle Families, which will also be his textbook for this academic year. He is not planning to change his textbooks. He has little experience when he first arrived. Not just when he first arrived at Hogwarts, but also in the entire wizarding world. And since he already has classic textbooks, he might as well stick to them. This textbook is 90% new. The first half still has some traces of flipping through, while the second half is clean as if it had never been opened by the previous owner. Anthony flipped through the book hastily, and most of the notes were hastily drawn key points before the exam, with the underline floating out of the book. The unknown kind-hearted student only bought it to let it fall into dust, and ultimately had Anthony pick up this cheap item on a second-hand bookshelf. He flipped over to the place where the other person had placed the bookmark. This page may be the one with the most notes in the entire book. Its owner painted graffiti all over it. Anthony hopes to have the profession of a painter in the wizarding world. Given the other party's attitude towards Muggle research courses, he cannot imagine this wizard going to the Muggle world to hold an art exhibition. In recent years, a new technological means has emerged in Muggle society, which they call electricity. Electricity is no less important to modern Muggles than magic is to us. Using electricity, Muggles have changed their way of life and created a series of convenient tools that we thought could only be achieved through magic, such as the phone. This is a device invented by Muggle that utilizes electricity for remote real-time communication, similar in some functions to the Flyroad network. However, unlike the Flyroad network, telephones can only transmit sound, and often distort it, making it impossible for people to communicate face-to-face, let alone for transportation. The student bored and drew a fireplace next to the Flying Road network and a sealed fireplace next to the telephone. He stood alone in the sealed fireplace, tapping on the wooden board and talking to the room. The student circled the wooden board that sealed the fireplace and marked it as electric. "Oh my goodness, I completely misunderstood," Anthony muttered to himself. He looked at the lifelike fireplace and remembered the toad-like head of a woman suddenly emerging from the Ministry of Magic. "I still prefer phone calls, at least they can be rejected," he thought. For the next few weeks, Anthony immersed himself in the sea of books, and when he got tired of reading, he went downstairs to chat with the guests in the tavern. Tom also became familiar with him and began to address him by his Christian name, while also teaching him several kitchen spells such as automatic dishwashing and directing plates to be stacked according to size. The magical world is much more interesting than he imagined. The guests who came to drink told him more or less about the magic world. He also knew about the 4 colleges at Hogwarts. "Be careful of Slytherin students, Professor." The person drank so hard that their tongue became a bit swollen. "There's a group of bad guys and bad girls over there." But when the person heard that he was teaching Muggle research, he shrugged and said, "Then you don't have to worry." "Why?" Anthony asked curiously. "Because no Slytherin would choose your class," the other person said with a drunken wave of their hand, sounding quite confident, "and they're usually not stupid enough to provoke you in their spare time. You can deduct points, that's why." After the guest left, Tom told him that he was a graduate of Slytherin. After carefully reading The Life and Social Habits of Muggle Families in Britain, Anthony decided to go to Lycan bookstore again and buy some additional materials on Muggle Studies. He also wants to buy more books on magic spells. He has finished learning the 5th grade textbook and is preparing to move towards an EW.TS level effort. In fact, he is also quite interested in Defense Against the Dark Arts, but the textbook for this course always changes, so he didn't buy it. The person from the Broken Cauldron Bar said that this is because Defense Against the Dark Arts can be taught by a new professor every year. Defense Against the Dark Arts masters from all over the UK are almost being hired by Hogwarts, they said. "I'm sure they'll be rehired in the hospital bed in San Mango next year." Anthony knocked on the wall tiles and stepped onto the narrow cobblestone street of Diagon Alley. Perhaps due to his mastery of more formal magical knowledge, rather than his own bone gameplay, compared to the sudden and cold unfamiliarity when he first arrived, he now has some familiarity with Diagon Alley. "I am a wizard," Anthony thought. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries, the strange smell of magical potions, and the scent of exotic spices from distant lands. The store is decorated with colorful signs and sparkling magic, displaying various magical items, spell books, pots, robes, or brooms in the showcase windows. He walked through the bustling crowd, bypassing their cheerful laughter and chatter, and headed straight towards the Lycan bookstore. The clerk behind the counter often goes to the Broken Cauldron Bar and is familiar with him. Anthony greeted from a distance, waved his hand to show that he didn't care about himself, and then focused his attention on the bookshelf. Perhaps it is because the textbook list for this academic year has been finalized, and many new books have been replaced on the most prominent bookshelf in the bookstore. Several children wearing wizard robes stood under the shelf, looking up carefully for books. Anthony walked silently behind them to the second-hand book section. "I really don't understand why every time I change a professor, I have to change a textbook," complained the witch standing in front of the second-hand bookshelf. "Put it down, Fred. We're not buying that." "Mom, I found it," another red-haired boy waved his book and called out. He glanced at the cover again. "Oh, it's not this." Anthony stood behind this noisy family, studying the messy list of books on the bookshelf. The witch seemed to feel like she was blocking him, gave way to him, smiled apologetically at him, and Anthony gave her a smile. "The school is about to start," she said. "The books on Defense Against the Dark Arts change every year, and their brother's book is no longer usable." Anthony nodded in understanding and said, "That's really expensive." "Yeah," she shook her head. "And you, what are you buying?" "Find some Muggle-related information." "Are you also interested in Muggles?" the witch asked enthusiastically. "My husband is a Muggle enthusiast. He talks to you about switches, engines. Every day at the dining table. You know, we don't understand those things. Oh, I'm Molly Weasley. He's obsessed with those Muggle things. Look, he has all those books. She pointed out the books in the corner to Anthony. Anthony said happily, then I'll buy these. He accompanied Mrs. Weasley to find several textbooks on defense against the dark arts and reserved a pen pal named Arthur Weasley for farewell. New Muggle research professor. Merlin, Arthur would be thrilled. Professor Bobaki never replies to his letters. I will be careful not to let him send too much nonsense, Professor Anthony. Coming out of the Lycan bookstore, Anthony was originally planning to go straight back to the Broken Cauldron bar, but changed his mind when passing by the magic animal store and decided to go inside to see if there was any magical cat food. When living on the Dongqing Street, the skeleton cat looked down on all the food he bought. Only when Anthony poured white wine would he approach the bowl with respect and immerse his head in the wine. The soul fire in its eyes will ignite the white wine, and when the wine in the bowl is burned dry, it will jump back to the sofa satisfied. Since Anthony came out of Azkaban and repaired the skeleton of the skeleton cat, it has been much more docile, but it has not eaten much. It doesn't really like the sherry at the Broken Cauldron bar and always walks away disgusted when touched. Anthony insists that the sherry at the Broken Cauldron bar is mixed with water, even though Tom always denies it. Perhaps cats in the magical world will eat some magical food that can enrich their recipes. He pushed open a magical animal shop. The crowded shop was filled with the flapping of wings and the gentle rustling of fur, as the owls standing on the perch or windowsill solemnly scrutinize the visitors. Cats of various colors wander along the shelf, their tails swaying with curiosity. Do you want to buy a pet, sir? The shop assistant asked earnestly. Owls and cats are the most popular among children. They are smart and clean. We also have smaller pets. Here, mice and toads are common Hogwarts pets, while plush and shape-shifting rabbits are very suitable and interesting magical pets. No, I just want to see cat food, Anthony refused. He has no plans to keep another pet. Perhaps influenced by undead magic, his cat refused to see any living creatures on his territory. Anthony reluctantly excluded. Speaking of which, Anthony may not be considered a living creature now. According to the history of magic, with the study of undead magic, it seems that undead wizards will gradually fall between life and death. Some radical classification methods may even refuse to recognize undead mages as humans and classify them as dark creatures along with Grindello, vampires, werewolves, and others. Anthony withdrew his divergent thoughts and listened attentively as the staff of the magical animal store passionately introduced the cat food to him. This can make the fur smooth, this can reduce hair loss, that is a powerful version specifically designed for long-haired cats, and here, you can briefly change the color of the cat's fur to add some fun to life. Very tempting, especially when you have a skeleton cat. Is there anything unrelated to fur? He finally couldn't help but ask. The shop assistant was taken aback and said, for example, preventing osteoporosis. The shop assistant, who couldn't help but laugh and cry, told him that if his cat had osteoporosis, he only needed to feed it some diluted bone-generating spirit. Anthony thanked him and planned to go to a regular store to buy some plain white wine for the cat. The outside of the Broken Cauldron bar is Charing Cross Street. He took a few more steps outside and suddenly found himself in a familiar crowd, his wizard robe out of place with the traffic around him. The once narrow cobblestone streets have transformed into broader streets, filled with the vitality of non-magical life. The sound of car horns, people talking, and footsteps intertwine harmoniously with the rhythm of this city. Anthony quickly went back and changed into a new outfit. Sooner or later, I will learn how to quickly change clothes, he said to himself. I bet someone has figured it out. They even used the continuation curse to add alcohol. The feeling of entering the supermarket is very subtle. He used to be a part of this world. Seeing those neatly arranged and peaceful shelves, he felt a warm sense of belonging from the bottom of his heart, almost like a wanderer returning home. He touched those simple items. Dishwashing sponges, calculators, pens. Some kind of huge emotion hit him. The soft electric lights, promotional labels, and customers carrying heavy shopping baskets in this ordinary supermarket without any magic possess their own unique magic, a kind of ordinary, civilized, and vibrant magic. He handed the wine to the cashier and settled the account in pounds. "Wishing you a wonderful day." The young cashier smiled at him. Anthony said seriously, "Thank you, you too. Goodbye." As he walked out of the store, he stared at the sign above his head for a while, took a deep breath, and turned back to walk towards the Broken Cauldron bar. "I just can't live here, I can't work here anymore," he thought optimistically. Finding a book garden at www.zhaoshuyuan.com is also a good way to live a magical life, and the Muggle Studies class looks very easy. The course of Muggle Studies may not be so easy, Anthony thought. The skeleton cat was contentedly burning the wine in the bowl beside him. He lay in bed, looking at the book he had bought on Mrs. Weasley's recommendation today. She said her husband couldn't help but praise the book. Anthony originally planned to use this as a bedtime reading material. As wizards, we are often drawn to the mysteries and wonders of the magical world. However, for us, understanding and appreciating the lives of those who do not possess magical abilities is equally important. In this book, we embark on a journey to explore Muggles' intricate and complex life, revealing their unique way of life. Muggles' daily lives do not include magic, the author writes enthusiastically in the preface. The magic we use in our daily lives, such as flickering fluorescence, repairing to the original, cleaning up, and flying back and forth, is quite difficult for them. If they need to light the fireplace, they will use tools called flint and fire steel, instead of simple blazing flames. If lighting is needed at night, they cannot use flickering fluorescence to light the wand, but instead candles. Muggles place candles on a beautiful tray, surrounded by glass to prevent the flames from being extinguished by the wind. Anthony flipped back to the front page in surprise. Muggle Daily. A book to understand all the details, published in November 1753. That makes sense, he muttered, writing matches and lighters in the blank space next to the ignition method, and marking a flashlight next to the lighting. If Mr. Weasley is already the group of people in the wizarding world who are most interested in Muggles, Anthony really doesn't know what Hogwarts is teaching. Chapter 7. Cat Hair and Professor Quirrell. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. When Anthony woke up on August 1st, he habitually glanced at the study plan on the wall and suddenly realized that July had already passed. Hogwarts will start school in another month. And he will be moving to Hogwarts in half a month. What will you do? He poked the skull of the bed corner cat. If I had money, I would buy a dragon skin suitcase to hide you. His cat stood up, stretched lazily, and jumped onto him without hesitation. Anthony patted it and said, "Don't worry, I'll come up with a solution. If it doesn't work out, I'll put fur all over your body." "Good morning, Henry." Tom was wiping his glass with a dirty cloth as he came downstairs with scratches for breakfast. "How is your study plan?" "Not much. The transformation technique is much harder than I imagined, or I am much dumber than I imagined. Choose either." Compared to the smooth sailing of magic spell practice, Anthony has some difficulty with transformation techniques. It took him 3 days of practice just to turn a match into a needle, and this was just the first practice in a first-grade textbook. He complained while eating, "In 3 days, I only need 3 days to finish learning the beginner curse." "That's because your curse talent is too high," Tom chuckled. "Ha, fortunately you didn't study at Hogwarts, otherwise the person whose name cannot be said would definitely notice you." At Dumbledore's suggestion, Anthony publicly claimed to have a Muggle background, which is good, but he did not enter Hogwarts to study, unrelated, in an attempt to avoid the chaos caused by mysterious people, and thus lived in the Muggle world all along. The Ministry of Magic turned a blind eye to this statement, and there was no further movement except for this morning when the owl brought the teaching permit. "You missed too much yesterday," Tom lowered his voice and boasted to him, "Guess who came?" Anthony absent-mindedly spread butter onto his bread, reviewing the key points of his transformation technique in his mind. "Who?" "Lockhart. His books are always placed in the most prominent position at the Lycan bookstore. It is said that Jidro Loart teaches you to clean up pests at home has not been among the top 3 monthly bestsellers since its publication. Harry Potter. I even shook hands with him." Tom whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "He's back, that's great. Henry, you didn't see him. Mr. Potter is extremely humble and calm. Everyone wanted to shake hands with him, and he agreed. But he's not proud at all. I'll tell you, not at all. He just doesn't know how to refuse, if it weren't Hagrid." "Oh, you haven't met Hagrid again. Henry, you've really missed out too much. Anthony knows who Harry Potter is. The baby who was said to have prevented the collapse of the magical world. His name was solemnly written into all modern and contemporary magical history materials, embedded in the headline. He was a bit surprised and said, 'What is he doing at a bar at his age?' Tom was very dissatisfied and said, 'What are you thinking? Mr. Harry Potter is going to Hogwarts for school, and Hagrid brought him to Diagon Alley to buy essential items. Hagrid is also a regular at the Broken Cauldron Bar, and Tom and Anthony have talked about it several times. It is said that he is tall and always uses the largest glass when drinking, and he never knows his alcohol tolerance. No bar owner would dislike Hagrid," Tom said at the time. "He always wants the largest glass of wine and refills it. He's a good person, Hagrid. He's talkative and has a good temper. He never gets angry when he loses money while playing cards." Anthony also really wanted to meet the big guy Tom talked about as having a good temper, but he had been busy making up for Hogwarts classes and would only come downstairs to the bar to have something to eat at mealtime. The baked noodles at the Broken Cauldron Bar were unparalleled. And Hagrid had never been during this time period. Even if Anthony decided to relax a few nights and ask Tom for a few more drinks, spending time listening to guests chatting, boasting, and joking with each other, he never met Hagrid. "It's okay, you can always see it at school." After finishing his bread in a few bites, he returned to his room with the intention of continuing his practice. He must turn that damn toothbrush into a chair today. When Anthony went to the bathroom to get his toothbrush, the mirror on the wall said sadly, "It's really surprising, dear. You look even worse than before. You may not believe it, but so do you." He shook his toothbrush, ignoring the mirror's criticism of his rude remarks. "I'm going to practice, and no one can interrupt me today." The unchangeable study plan was disrupted by his cat. The skeleton cat can no longer be called a skeleton, it is now a ginger plush kitten. This matter needs to start from last week. That day, a guy who had made a fortune claimed to have bought all the drinks at the Broken Cauldron Bar tonight. Anthony happily drank a few more glasses. Or barrels, that's not important. Half drunk. He felt that the wizard next to him, who was tightly covered in a hood, was particularly likable, and bought the elixir of life, provided by the other party. 20 galleons, my friend, you can't find a more cost-effective deal anymore, the other person said sweetly. A genuine elixir of immortality, made from that magic stone, do you understand what I mean? Nico Lemmy drinks all this kind of alcohol, and my cousin and his wife's apprentice have some connection. The next day, Anthony woke up and showed Tom the large glass bottle. Hair growth potion. Tom sniffed it, it has a dark magic smell. It should be a low-quality product from the overturned alley, I don't know what it added. Anthony was a bit surprised. He thought he would buy tap water. His cat likes that glass bottle very much, and when he is not paying attention, he will go and pick it up. Just now, Anthony heard a crisp sound in the bathroom, and when he came out, he saw the shiny broken glass on the floor and a damp turmeric cat rolling in the potion. Meow, said the cat. It rolled over and sat up obediently, with yellow eyes pitifully looking at him. 3 minutes ago, there were still 2 throbbing soul fires in those eyes. Anthony looked at it for a while and sighed. Forget it, it's not a bad thing either, he said, picking up the cat and sniffing it. You need to take a shower, cat. I don't know what was added to that bottle of hair growth potion, but after taking a bath for the cat, Anthony's hands became incredibly large and his nails and hair grew exceptionally long. He tried to use the cutting curse to trim his nails, but eventually gave up because his left hand was too clumsy. Is this the latest fashion? The mirror commented, I like your hand hair, they are dense and long. Thank you, you've made me feel much better, Anthony said and decided to go downstairs for Tom to take a look. The owner of a broken kettle bar always knows many bizarre tricks. He sat in front of the bar with his hands in hand. Tom didn't even look up and said, Are you coming down? What do you want? Let me show you something, Anthony said. Tom finally glanced at him from the ledger. A pair of big hands. The Broken Cauldron bar had few customers at noon, only Tom and a few regulars he knew. Anthony didn't tell them specifically what the problem was, he only said that he had made some mistakes while practicing the course. They mocked him for a while before forming a group to study his comical hands. It's a perfect match for size and Hagrid, said one person. If it's not uncomfortable, there's no problem keeping it. How about going to San Mango? A dozen or so galleons, they can cure it immediately. Anthony said slowly, if you still remember that I bought a bottle of 20-carat elixir of life. Everyone burst out laughing again. He's out of money. Tom slammed the table and shouted loudly, Poor Henry, he doesn't have money or medical insurance, but there's a bottle of elixir of life. And furry big hands. And sharp nails. They were causing too much commotion. Bring Hagrid's cup, Henry, I'll treat you, and the guest who had just pushed open the tavern door trembled, seeming to be hesitating whether to approach the bar. Tom called out, Professor Quirrell, would you like something to drink? Oh, your new headscarf and robe match very well. What are you doing? What are you doing? The person walked up to the bar and stuttered. He was wrapped in a large purple scarf on his head, and sweat oozed from it. Even though the weather had gradually cooled down, Anthony still felt that he was wearing too much. But wizards may not mind this. Tom pointed to Anthony's hand and said, Come and take a look at this, Professor. If you solve it, I can give you a free drink today. Quirrell's face turned pale as he slowly approached Anthony's hand. His body trembled suddenly, holding onto his scarf as if he was experiencing immense pain. Sheng. Sheng hair potion, yes, yes, yes. His voice was low as if talking to himself, adding the blood of the giant monster and ginger root to replace the tail of the mouse. Tom and he stared closely at Anthony's hand and said, Do you have a solution? Speaking of which, Henry will soon be your colleague. Are you also a Hogwarts professor? Quirrell looked up, Which subject do you teach? Anthony felt a bit uneasy when he saw him. Compared to Professor Kylo, who could tell at a glance what was wrong with the magic potion he touched, Professor Gilua's own strength was not enough to see. If the professors at Hogwarts are all at this level, his title as a professor would be too untrue. As soon as Anthony thought about his future colleagues being so talented and outstanding, he silently revised his study plan in his heart, striving to make up for everything he could before the start of school. Muggle Studies in 3rd and 4th grade. He said, Henry Anthony, nice to meet you, Professor Quirrell. Which subject do you teach? Quirrell moved his body uneasily and said vaguely, Black. Black magic defense. Defense. I've also taught Ma Muggle research before. Ma Muggle is very interesting, isn't it? He stirred his fingers and smiled nervously at Anthony's hand. Soak it in Bandy Mongfen. Secretions and locust juice for half an hour. Thank you so much, Professor Quirrell. There seems to be a pharmacy in Diagon Alley, I'll go right away. Anthony said, Tom, I'll treat Professor Quirrell to 2 more drinks. No need to go, it's very common. I have it here, Tom said. 27 Nate, just take it upstairs and soak it. When Anthony left, he heard Quirrell weakly say to Tom, white brandy. For the next half hour, Anthony's bathroom was filled with a strange odor. He frowned and soaked his hands in the sink, with a beginner's transformation guide floating on the skeleton in front of him. 2 spare chicken leg bones eagerly flipped a page for him. At this time, the undead magic that requires no hands is particularly useful. You look very painful, dear, the mirror said with concern. Why don't you sit down? I am learning how to transform a chair, Anthony replied. Chapter 8. First afternoon tea attended by professors. You are listening at novel full.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. In mid-August, approaching the start of school, Anthony packed his things and moved from the Broken Cauldron Bar to Hogwarts. His brass key corresponds to a simple wooden door on the 2nd floor of the castle, inside which is his professor's office. There is also a hidden door in the office that leads to the secluded bedroom. The bedroom is fully equipped with furniture and facilities. A sturdy set of tables, chairs, bookshelves, a comfortable bed, a bed curtain embroidered with the Hogwarts school emblem, and a bathroom. The Hogwarts mirror doesn't speak, thank goodness. The professor at Hogwarts has a high degree of freedom, he can decorate the office and bedroom according to his own preferences. I heard that Professor Quirrell next door hung garlic all over the door because he was worried about being retaliated by vampires. Anthony spent some time tidying up his room before staring blankly at the empty office. According to Professor McGonagall, professors usually decorate their offices in a way that is relevant to their subjects, making it easier for them to wake up and continue their research career. Professor Snape from the potion class even expanded his entire potion room. But Anthony really can't think of what he should put in the office, Muggle specimen. He is not a real dark wizard. Moreover, apart from a wand, there is no difference in appearance between a wizard and a Muggle. As for the internal physiological structure. Given that wizards have some bubbling potions and swishing spells, it is obvious that they do not need to understand the human body structure to be able to cure diseases. During lesson preparation, he also asked the intern staff at Lycan Bookstore if they wanted to buy some books related to human anatomy for wizards to compare with Muggle medicine. The little girl's face turned pale with fear, and she shook her head desperately. So he asked the little elves in the castle to help him set up a set of tables and chairs. No French window and velvet curtains. A set of tables and chairs is very good. Thank you. What kind of tables and chairs do you want? The housekeeper asked urgently, aren't 3 drawers too few? Do you like golden handles? In the end, a magnificent set of tables and chairs was placed in the middle of his empty office. The mahogany table was carefully polished and polished, with delicate carvings on the edges. Anthony looked up and saw a row of dancing pears. In addition to the 5 drawers with golden handles, the elf also thoughtfully placed additional storage compartments on the table. On the inside of the curved armrest of the chair, carved pears sit together and sing. The velvet cushion is embroidered with Anthony's name in gold thread. Okay, I'm very satisfied, thank you. Anthony stopped the elf who was trying to continue optimizing, and his light bulb-like big eyes eagerly stared at him. I'm really satisfied, quite perfect, I can't find a better one anymore. The domestic elf bowed joyfully to him and said, my honor. With a snap, it disappeared. It's a bit terrifyingly enthusiastic, isn't it? Anthony walked into the bedroom and released the cat from his backpack. You're okay, don't demolish the house. The cat looked up at him, jumped onto the bed, stepped on it, and lay down safely. It originally had a much better temper, but later developed flesh and fur, which made it sleep longer. Even if it woke up, it would spend a long time licking its fur, unlike when it was still living in an apartment, climbing high and jumping low every day. Sometimes it's too quiet, and Anthony still misses its frantic scratching of the door. He couldn't resist and reached out to poke its soft belly, being held in one claw. He lay in bed playing with the cat for a while, then withdrew his hand and sat up, saying, "It's not noisy anymore. I'll go to the faculty lounge to take a look." He happened to have a good time in the past, just in time for afternoon tea. Professor Bobaki sat with a witch and saw him from afar. He smiled and waved to let him pass. Henry Anthony, our new professor of Muggle research, as you know, Professor Bobaki introduced to the witch at the table and said, "This is Pomona Sprout, a professor of herbal medicine and our most outstanding sponsor of afternoon tea." Antonaton held the professor with a kind smile in awe. He knew almost nothing about herbal medicine, so he hastily read a few chapters of the textbook and put it aside during the remedial class. In his eyes, those exquisite sketches, detailed classifications, detailed explanations of functions, and complex theoretical analyses can be summarized as one word: cumbersome. He has limited time and currently lacks patience and perseverance to memorize a plant genealogy. "Finally, someone has come to share your work," Professor Sprout said, nodding friendly at Anthony. "You're not a graduate of Hogwarts, are you? I don't think I've seen you before." "Oh." Newcomer, a professor who had just walked into the lounge, exclaimed happily, "Is this Professor Anthony? Carrie has been talking about you for a long time, and you don't know how much she wants to find someone to replace her." "Who wouldn't want to?" Professor Sprout joked. The professor exclaimed in a sharp voice, "Pomona. Are you also going to retire? She started looking for suitable candidates last year, Felius. She just didn't like those herbal masters outside. Unless she suddenly lowered her standards, you can still be colleagues for at least another 20 years. Professor Bobaki smiled and turned his head to introduce Anthony, Professor of Charm, Felius Flavia. Anthony's eyes immediately lit up. He should indeed have some talent in magic spells. He has mastered all the required spells for the 7th grade of Hogwarts, and has also succeeded in several advanced spells. But this method of emphasizing practice over theory also has its drawbacks. He doesn't understand how his spell of failure failed. He was originally planning to seek advice from Professor Bobaki or Professor Quirrell, but unexpectedly encountered Professor Charm. Professor Flavia is a cheerful little old man, very small in stature. He deliberately raised his chair by more than 10 inches before sitting comfortably on it. "What kind of tea is it today?" "Oh, give me some too, thank you." The teapot flew up and steadily poured him a cup, followed by 2 sugar cubes automatically rolling into his cup. Professor Flavia slowly stirred the tea with a silver spoon and looked up at Anthony with a smile. "What's wrong, Professor Anthony?" I self-taught Hogwarts curse class," he said with some embarrassment. "Ah, that's great. That's great." Professor Flavia said happily, "I guess you have some curse questions you want to ask me." Anthony nodded and said, "I have many foolish questions. The first foolish question is, why can't I clean up the water that turns out to be like a spring? I've tried ordinary water, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I've never succeeded with the water from the Qingchuan curse." "Good question, Professor Anthony, good question. This is definitely not a stupid question." Professor Flavia waved his small silver spoon. "In fact, if you ask a wizard 100 years ago, he will tell you he doesn't know, but the solution is the quick drying spell. It wasn't until a D.B. Wolfland defined the scope of the spell's application that we realized it was because the water produced by magic is not considered a stain, and the cleaning spell, in terms of its spell composition, is aimed at stains." He glanced at Anthony, who had a sudden realization, and said, "You didn't read The Theory of Magic, did you?" "No," Anthony admitted. "Is that also the textbook for spell classes?" "I thought it was only standard spells." Professor Fleetwell said seriously, "It's not a textbook for spell classes, it's the theoretical cornerstone of all Hogwarts courses." "I will definitely go and read it," Anthony promised. "Don't be nervous, Henry. It's not the theoretical cornerstone of Muggle research. Professor Bobaki put down his teacup. We don't have a theory. She complained to Anthony, wizards really don't know much about Muggles. I once had a final practice exam and asked them to come to the exam room with a set of clothes suitable for visiting Muggle families. Professor Sprout took a biscuit and smiled knowingly. Obviously, this is not the first time Professor Bobaki has told this story. Guess what they're wearing? Professor Bobaki asked. Some people just went to the Muggle store and grabbed a few pieces of clothing. I don't even know if they paid. And put them on for the exam. Some of them even didn't remove their trademark tags. When I asked him, he even told me it was a Muggle decoration, similar to cufflinks. Charlie Weasley, he went to study fire dragons. And Mr. Weasley, the student's father, liked to write letters to me for a while, asking me some Muggle-related questions. He asked me how a car works, and I was surprised that he at least knew what a car is, so he told him that it mainly relies on the engine. After a week, he actually sent me an engine that was removed from the car and asked me why it doesn't work. Also, don't you know how outdated the textbooks they originally used were? Muggle Everyday, I remember calling it that name. Their textbooks are still in the 18th century, while we are already in the 20th century. Professor Bobaki complained, I changed books as soon as I took office. It was a disaster. Last year, a student who was still writing charcoal was suddenly told that the correct answer was natural gas. Everyone was holding past textbooks and my theories, trying to tell me that their answers were fine. I had to be frank and tell them that copying the answer passed down from an unknown generation would not benefit them at all. Because my teaching focus is on modern Muggles, who live by their side and may be their classmates' parents and friends. They cannot treat Muggles from the 20th century with the same attitude as 18th century Muggles, which is not feasible. Perhaps 18th century wizards are not as different from us, but Muggles change quickly. Anthony listened sympathetically to her complaints. Professors Flavia and Sprout were both smiling and drinking tea, looking at Professor Bobaki kindly, as if she was more interesting than what she said. Anthony felt that he might be the only person on the entire table who fully understood her complaints. Professor Bobaki clearly shares the same feeling. I liked you as soon as I saw your outfit, she said affectionately to Anthony. When he opened the door, he was like an authentic Muggle, just standing at the door of the room at the Broken Cauldron Bar. I was thinking to myself, where did the principal find such a Muggle? Oh, by the way, how did you prepare for your class? When he left the professor's lounge, Anthony had an extra 1-foot-long book list in his hand, which included reference books recommended by Professor Bobaki and theoretical readings recommended by Professor Flavi. Chapter 9. Good luck to you, Professor Anthony. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Anthony held the book list and walked up the stairs leading to the second floor. He plans to visit the library at Hogwarts. Excellent intelligence and talent are the greatest wealth of humanity, Professor Flavi said as he presented the books to him. You don't want to miss Hogwarts treasury, Professor Anthony. Some stairs may suddenly appear or disappear, forcing students to strive to remember the temper of all the stairs in the castle, but the professor always has a little privilege. He can walk the most convenient spiral staircase. Anthony followed the stairs to the sunny corridor on the second floor. Looking out, the lawn unfolds a warm green glow under the sunlight, extending all the way into the pitch-black forbidden forest. In the library, sunlight shines through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on rows of bookshelves on the walls. Hogwarts has not yet started school, and there is no one else in the library except for the administrator Mrs. Pants. The air was filled with the smell of old parchment and dust. There are neatly arranged long wooden tables around the room, quietly waiting for those seeking knowledge. When Anthony walked into the library, Mrs. Pants sternly examined him and said, Professor Henry Anthony. It's me, Anthony said. Okay, please sign here. When students want to borrow books from the restricted area, they may ask for your permission. Mrs. Ping handed him a heavy notebook. There is a reason why prohibited books are designated as prohibited books. The books here are relatively dangerous, please be careful. Anthony wrote his name under Quirrell's trembling signature. I guess there's no Muggle research book in the restricted area. Muggle Studies, no, Mrs. Pants said. Muggles are related, many, and very dangerous. If you're interested, they're all in the dark magic zone. Let's take a look at regular books first. Anthony politely declined as he took out his book list. I want to find these books. With the help of Mrs. Ping, he quickly found all the books listed by Professor Bubaki. Part of the books recommended by Professor Flavia are in the restricted area. Strange, I remember it was here. Mrs. Ping frowned and looked at the bookshelf. On the crowded bookshelf, there is a tiny gap. The book on its left began to drip with a sticky red liquid, dripping onto the shelf below, making sharp howls. Madam Ping rudely flicked the spine of the book with a feather duster. The liquid and scream disappeared. Anthony looked down at the reading list. Under Magic. Madam, is this dangerous? He asked. What I mean is, are we going to rescue a student who fainted in the dormitory for the whole vacation now? Mrs. Pants shook her head in confusion and said, no, there is no deadly magic in the missing book. It became a banned book because of its content. Its author is both a magic theorist and an expert in magical animals, and is very passionate about exploring the differences in how magic is manifested in wizards and magical animals. He has conducted many illegal experiments for this. He probably died in Azkaban. We are worried that some students who are unaware of the depth of the book will be misled by the content, so it is listed as a banned book. I can't think of who would steal this book. She stared fixedly at that position, as if she wished to stare the thief's soul out of the crack with her gaze. Is there any surveillance in the restricted area? Mrs. Ping was greatly offended and said, I am the only one, and I never slack off. No, I'm not talking about that. Anthony realized she misunderstood. I'm talking about the camera. Camera. Never mind, don't worry. Anthony gave up. He is not prepared to explain to people what closed-circuit television is. Note 1, but Mrs. Ping refused to let him go. Are you talking about something Muggle-like, Professor Anthony? So Anthony spent over half an hour explaining to her what he knew about the management of the Muggle library. Mrs. Ping asked more and more questions, so Anthony had to tell her that library management in Muggle is a complex subject. Muggle schools offer corresponding majors, and it takes students several years to complete and graduate. He is just an ordinary reader and cannot answer overly professional questions. It's really interesting, Mrs. Ping said thoughtfully. I didn't know they had a library. Anthony took a deep breath and whispered to himself, I'm used to it. What, Professor? Mrs. Ping asked absent-mindedly. She began to fixate on the gap again. Anthony said, I'm saying that I will work hard to teach Muggle research well. You will do a great job, Professor Anthony, Mrs. Ping said. When is the first class? On the second day of school. Gryffindor and Slytherin are in third grade. Mrs. Ping widened her eyes and said, oh. She looked at Anthony with pity, good luck to you. The half-month before the start of school quickly passed. Anthony went out to eat, drink tea, and exchange knowledge with the professors. When he returned to his room, he focused on tutoring, preparing lessons, teasing the cat, and when he had time, he replied to Mr. Weasley's letter. Professor Flavia greatly praised his talent for magic spells and praised him for having a great deal of trust in his own magic. Spells and shape-shifting are very similar, but there is a slight difference. Professor Flavia told Anthony when he said his shape-shifting progress was slow, shape-shifting requires higher precision, and the biggest requirement of a spell is confidence. You have to believe that magic will respond to you. I have seen many students who have correct gestures and spells, but are unable to release perfect spells due to fear of failure. Professor Flavia happily handed Anthony a piece of cake. You trust magic very much, Professor Anthony, so magic favors you. Even imperfect gestures can achieve the right results because of your strong confidence. But shape-shifting doesn't work. No, it's the art of restraint and precision. I have to say, I prefer tolerant spells. He whispered to Anthony, don't tell Maliva. Anthony nodded sincerely and stuffed the cake into his mouth to show that his mouth was tightly sealed. Professor Flavia happily directed the teapot to pour him a cup of tea. However, on the other hand, whoever spent a long time crawling out of the coffin, waking up every day by vengeful spirits, and having a pet that is a skeleton, should trust magic very much. He also took some time to go find Hagrid and have a drink. Tom is right, Hagrid is a rough and enthusiastic good friend with an innocent temperament that does not match his fierce appearance. He was very happy when he heard that Anthony had a cat and said, "You should take it out for a walk, Henry. The sun is nice lately, and the students haven't come yet. You don't have to worry about anyone scaring your cat." Anthony recalled his cat-like attitude of not entering. He is worried that it is not the students who scared the cat, but the cat that scared the students. Let me give it a try, he finally promised to Hagrid's sincere black eyes. Hagrid also shared a lot of information about Hogwarts with him. Anthony now knows that the savior who will come this year was held by Hagrid when he was a child, and knows that there are many magical creatures living in the Forbidden Forest, including the unicorn he has never seen before. He also knows that the school's favorite violator who sneaks into the Forbidden Forest is the Weasley twins, a pair of third-grade Gryffindor. Hagrid heard that Anthony's first class happened to be when Gryffindor and Slytherin were in third grade. He patted Anthony's shoulder with his huge palm, almost hitting him under the table, and said, "Good luck, you'll be fine." He is very certain that the twins will take Anthony's class. Looking at the benefits, Hagrid said optimistically, "At least no Slytherin will choose courses. They won't fight in your classroom." The opening banquet on September 1st was very grand. The elf planned the menu at least 2 days in advance and asked the professor for their preferences and suggestions one by one. The surrounding weather has been adjusted again and again, just to make the floating candles in the hall appear bright and warm against the synchronized ceiling. On the evening of the banquet, a milky white ghost emerged through the wall, startling Anthony. The ghost and his vengeful spirit are completely different. Vengeful spirits have entities. Otherwise the vengeful chicken wouldn't have pecked him and called him out of bed. While the ghost clearly doesn't. He had never seen these ghosts in the castle before, and he didn't know if they were related to undead magic, and could he tell if he was an undead wizard. "Oh, you haven't visited Professor Binns yet." Professor Sprout saw his reaction and said to him through Trelawney, "He's a professor of history of magic and a ghost. He only stays in the history of magic classroom and his own room." The Sorting Hat sat on a wooden stool, waiting for the freshmen to be assigned to their respective colleges. The professors were asked to wear their best robes and sit in the main and guest seats, preparing to welcome the new students into the magical world. "Take a second look at Severus' robe, you haven't seen it many times a year," Professor Bobaki and Anthony said. 8,000 gallons, a graduate gave him. Anthony turned his head to take a look. Snape sat next to Professor Quirrell, looking impatient. His black robe is very black. Anthony has no idea about the standard of appreciation for wizard robes. He is currently wearing his most expensive robe, 11 gallons and 5 Cs. "I couldn't find those 8,000 gallons, he whispered to Professor Bobaki. Professor Bobaki chuckled. Anthony swore that Snape looked at them mockingly and whispered to Quirrell. After Professor McGonagall brought the new students into the room, the professors stopped chatting. Anthony sat up straight and stared at the empty plate in front of him at the opening party for the first time. Dumbledore, wearing his favorite wizard hat, went to the book garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com with great interest as he watched the new student walk towards the Sorting Hat with a pale face and trembling, tapping his fingers on the table to create a cheerful rhythm. Freshmen are divided into various colleges like assembly lines. Some people are obviously satisfied with their results, while some students take off their branch hats but feel lost and walk back to the long table of their college. Harry Potter. As predicted by Hagrid and Anthony while drinking. Entered Gryffindor. Deafening cheers erupted in the auditorium, and the Gryffindor table was filled with excitement. Anthony noticed that two red-haired boys with identical appearance jumped onto the chair, waved their hats and shouted, "We have Potter! We have Potter!" If Professor McGonagall was not standing on the side, Anthony would bet that they could dance a bullfight dance on the chair. Professor Bobaki noticed that he was looking at the twins. "Yes, you had them in your first class," she said helplessly. Fred Weasley and George Weasley, the Weasley twins. "Good luck, Professor Anthony." Professor Trelawney, on the other side of Anthony, stretched out her slender arm adorned with bracelets, took Anthony's teacup and gazed for a moment. "Bad luck, Professor Anthony. Inevitable bad luck." Note 1. Anthony asked, which is a very formal expression, but Mrs. Pants didn't know that he was referring to things like surveillance cameras. She understood, over plus watch, yes, watch Vanguard, according to the etymology of this word, so she herself is. Then Anthony changed the colloquial expression and talked to her about the camera, but after the magical world photos moved, it was obvious that she didn't consider making videos, so Mrs. Ping understood it as a camera. After thinking for a long time without finding a particularly good expression, I had to add a comment. Chapter 10. Professor Anthony's First Class. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, what is the name of the professor in Muggle research? Fred asked his brother. They have just been liberated from the potion class classroom. This semester, Snape's temper was extremely bad. Angelina only missed 2 ounces of Montmorillonite powder, and he became furious and deducted 10 points from Gryffindor. If it weren't for Fred's clever imitation of Snape's scolding, Angelina might have had an argument with Snape on the spot. But when a Weasley with the same sharp expression as him stood behind Snape, the angry professor became funny. Gryffindor deducts another 5 points, Snape warned as he glanced at her desk mate who was suppressing a smile and said without looking back, "Stay, Weasley." "But Professor, I didn't do anything." George shouted wrongly. The classmate behind him took a deep breath. Snape turned around and looked at George with a gloomy expression. Fred sat down before Snape turned around. Slytherin's pursuer glared at him angrily, and he looked back provocatively, holding on to the empty bat and giving him an airwalk ball. "I'm referring to another Mr. Weasley," Snape hissed, "but you managed to win yourself a stay." Weasley Gryffindor deducted 5 points. Fred and George slapped under the desk. George looked at his schedule and said, "Anthony, Henry Anthony. We're already late," but he looked quite talkative at the school banquet. Muggle Studies. Fred shrugged and strolled along the castle corridor with his brothers. It's just an elective, poor Professor Henry Anthony. Strange, I don't remember seeing him before the school dinner, but his name sounds a bit familiar. I'm also thinking, George said. Let me think. Wait. Mom. He's the pen pal Mom found for Dad. Fred suddenly realized. They ran wildly. The Muggle research classroom is on the first floor. They climbed up the stairs step by step, knocked on the open door of the classroom, and leaned out their panting heads, saying, "Professor, I'm sorry we're late. We were detained by Professor Snape." George looked very nervous and guilty. "Come in, Mr. Weasley." Anthony smiled as they found a seat in the back of the classroom. "By the way, next time you sit down, remember to pretend you haven't even adjusted your breath." Someone burst out laughing. "Okay, Professor," Fred said generously. "Since everyone is here, let's continue with the previous topic. I have already introduced myself, and it's your turn." Anthony thought for a moment, walked off the podium, and sat in the empty seat in the first row. Okay, there are more people taking this class than I imagined. Let's do a survey first. Why did you choose Muggle Studies? He looked at the freckled girl next to him with encouragement. I'm a mixed race, and I want to learn how to communicate with my grandmother. The girl whispered, her face turning red. Very good, having a willingness to understand is the most crucial step, Anthony said gently. What about the others? I'm very interested in Muggle sports. They don't use brooms, but a group of people running on the ground, and I heard there's only one ball, a tall student rushed to say. I know nothing about Muggles, so I think choosing a course might be helpful. I was brought here by him. I was also convinced by my friends to choose the course, Angelina said. I think Muggle music is very interesting. My grandmother was a witch from Muggle background. When she was still alive, my family would play Muggle Christmas songs every Christmas. We find Muggles' invention quite interesting, Fred said. Dad reminded us to choose courses, George said. And we need a similar quantity of OWL certificates, Fred added. My roommate comes from a Muggle background and invited me to visit her house for Christmas. A girl said, I need to prepare for it. After everyone had sat around, Anthony clapped his hands and pulled the students' attention back to him. Great, let me summarize. Interest, persuasion from friends, and an O.W.L.S certificate, right. Low laughter and murmurs of agreement came from the students. He stood up and walked back to the podium, writing down these 3 reasons on the blackboard. If I say that your reasons have already been predicted by Muggle, what would you think? He put down his pen and looked at the students in the audience, saying, our course is called Muggle Studies. Witches study Muggles, and Muggles also study themselves. In the first class, we will use a theory developed by Muggles themselves as an example. After this class, I hope you will find that Muggles and wizards are not that different. This is the key point of my teaching. This theory is Muggles' research on human behavior. For students who are not familiar with the meaning of human in the Muggle context, they can refer to Chapter 9 of the textbook, Muggle Titles and Appendix 2 at the end of the book. Anthony wrote in capital letters above the 3 reasons for course selection. Muggle Theory. Planned Behavior Theory. Like magic theory, Muggles have also developed various theories to explain their behavior. This theory is one of them. Just as magic theorists will tinker with magic theory, Muggles will also revise their theories based on real-life situations, so I don't know if this theory will be corrected in the future or falsified, but currently. He wrote, attitude, subjective norms, perceived behavior control under, interest, friend persuasion, water certificate. Attitude refers to your own attitude towards doing something. Because of your interest in Muggle research, you have a positive attitude towards course selection, which promotes this behavior. A few classmates began to nod. Subjective norms refer to how people you think are important to you will view this matter. Friends want you to choose courses, and they are important to you, which also promotes course selection behavior. Cough, some classmates, why are you blushing? Perceived behavioral control refers to how difficult you feel it is to do something. Choosing a simple course and passing the exam easily, you feel that it is not difficult and are confident that you can do it, which promotes course selection. Through the combination of these 3 factors, you ultimately sat here, Anthony concluded, welcome. Fred whispered to George, it seems like we're all occupied. We're interested. George shook hands and said, Dad strongly demands that we take courses, and half of the Quidditch team is here. We also think this certificate is easy to obtain. Think of Charlie. Oh, Professor Zhao's Huyuan.com, this is just a decoration of Muggle clothing. Fred imitated Charlie's tone, it's similar to cufflinks. Muggles hang up the price of clothes to showcase their wealth and status. They buried their heads in laughter. Anthony glanced several times in that direction, hesitating whether to establish the authority of the new professor or let go of the Weasley twins, who were already much quieter than he had imagined. The tall man who was interested in Muggle sports scratched his head and interrupted his gaze towards the corner. But Professor, that doesn't make sense. Even if I have all three, as long as the schedule for this class conflicts with the Quidditch training plan, I will definitely give up studying Muggle. Angelina gave him a hard elbow before he realized it later. Well, they don't actually conflict. I mean, I chose a course, I'm sorry. Anthony smiled and asked him not to worry. Interest, friends, and the difficulty of exams are just 3 examples. Muggles are very flexible, and they will try to make their theories contain as much as possible, so that when you want to make mistakes, you will be dizzy and confused. For example, if there is a conflict between the schedule and training now, it will have an impact on all 3 elements. For example, subjectively speaking, your teammates do not want you to choose courses, which hinders course selection behavior. Even if there are other friends persuading you to choose courses at this time, you can still tell them that if you choose courses, my teammates will kill me, right? These 3 elements are all a combination of multiple angles. He nodded. Anthony added 5 points to Gryffindor, who was actively thinking and speaking, and raised his volume. Alright, that's all for the theoretical part. Cheer up, boys and girls, let's do some practical exercises next.